Welcome to another session of the Iridescence Academy theme-based teaching. And today's topic happens to be a continuation of our previous topics regarding establishing healthy boundaries. And we are going to be looking specifically at establishing healthy boundaries at workplace today. So in the past couple of other recordings, if you're watching this on replay or if you're joining us live, this is our, I believe, the third installment of on the topic of boundaries. And we have covered the previous topics we've covered have to do with boundaries in general as concepts, and why it is important to establish healthy boundaries and why we don't establish healthy boundaries. And the second installment or the second session was specifically regarding establishing healthy boundaries with family, friends, your significant other, and your children. Now, the third installment, which is this particular session, is specifically going to be focused on boundaries at workplace. If you think about work, I think as we get started on this session, I just want to level set up front that this session is going to be divided into two major components. One is where we're going to talk or we're going to hear or just share a lot. I'm going to be sharing a lot of the symptoms that show us that we need to establish healthy boundaries at workplace. We're going to talk about two categories in them, one which is primarily driven by us, and second is the relationship with other people and how that unfolds as symptoms. And the second half of this session is going to be all activations using theta healing modality, the electromagnetic activations to clear any and all limiting beliefs that have surfaced up with regard to both of these types of symptoms that we may have. And also I'll be witnessing electromagnetic activations for new neural pathways getting created for these healthier beliefs that will help us in implementing these, healthy boundaries at work. So having level set how this session is going to unfold, coming back to the crux of the topic itself. When we think about work in general, it seems to be a lot of us seem to have this very fundamental perspective of work being that which we do for a living, right? We look at work, what do you do for a living? That's what we get asked. And the opportunity that this particular time presents us with when we look at work is when we look at work as an opportunity for us to grow, for us to develop ourselves to be a better version, it kind of shifts how we look at the work that we do. Instead of looking at it as something I have to do to make a living, something I have to do to get a paycheck so I can pay my bills, right? That is the common consciousness view of looking at the work that we do. And hence, by default, when we look at the job, and I say it very generically as work, not necessarily tagging it to a job or to a business. It doesn't matter whether you're a business owner, whether you're a self-employed individual, or you're working in an organization as an employee. At the end of the day, the perception we bring to what we do matters the most. So I want to start this session by giving that higher perspective that when we shift, and I'm reminded of Wayne Dyer's beautiful quote that when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. So the perspective we want to bring in this scenario, specifically to the work that we do, whether it is a job or a business or self-employment, is that it is actually an opportunity for us to commit to our development, our growth, because everything in life presents us with an opportunity to really learn and grow. And in a workplace, that opportunity is significantly higher simply because there are commitments we are expected to make. We are expected to be responsible. We are expected to be accountable. We are expected to be delivering work that we say we will deliver. And it requires for us to work with other people, whereby we are going to be having these opportunities to really learn from those interactions. So I think starting right there by just setting that perspective to say, my work that I do, whether it be a job, a business, or my own employment that I'm running as a business, however it unfolds for you in your specific scenario, the opportunity to share our gifts, our talents, our abilities, and our skills, and an opportunity to grow all of these and an opportunity to really internalize and develop ourselves on a personal level. That when you look at a job that we do from that perspective, it also takes us away from the mundaneness with which we look at it, and the feeling that we bring, the energy that we bring to it is no longer that of, oh, I should do this, I must do this, right? I always say there are no shoulds in life. There are no shoulds in life, right? You shouldn't have to do anything. You really do something because you feel like doing it. There's a love of doing it. So the first fundamental shift I want to offer to all of us, again, we will not be doing this as an activation. We'll probably do it towards the end of the session, is that to shift our perspective on a conscious level, that we look at work as an opportunity to serve, to expand our abilities, our gifts, talents, and skills, and also grow ourselves. And thereby, we're getting something in return as a result of serving and offering those talents and gifts. We're getting money as a return on energy exchange, right? Energy is exchange. When we perform something for an organization or for somebody else through our business, we are performing, we are serving them in some ways, and hence the return exchange from an energy standpoint is basically the money, right? So when we shift our perspective starting right there and completely orienting ourselves, knowing fully well that we are spiritual beings having a human experience. And I always say this, at the very deepest, profoundest level, we don't get to carry any of the material things with us, right? So then what is the point of going through all this? Like, why do I have to go 9 to 5 and do this hamster wheel, do the same job, same thing? Why do I have to do something to make a living? Why do I have to work hard to pay my bills? Really, if you look at the deeper perspective and a really profound perspective on that, is we are spiritual beings having a human experience, and we don't get to take any of these material things with us when we leave. But what we do get to take with us is who we internally become. Again, it is such a deeper part of our spirit that transforms through the journey of what we experience at whether it's work life or home life or personal life. It's who we become that happens to be the whole purpose of the journey. And it is so important to have that understanding so that we are able to look at work from that higher perspective, whatever it is that we do as work. And thereby, tying it back to our very first topic on why establish healthy boundaries, is because at workplace, where we spend the most of our day, right? Many of us spend about 8, 10, sometimes 12, sometimes 16-hour days at our workplace, whether it is a job that we do or a business that we do. We are spending bulk of our waking day at the workplace, and thereby it becomes that much more important for us to really establish healthy boundaries at workplace. So now that I have set that perspective, a higher perspective, let's take a look at what might be the potential symptoms. And I call them all symptoms because underlying the whole topic is about establishing healthy boundaries at work. So we know what the requirement or what it is that we need to do. But before we know what we need to do, before we get there, we need to know what is the problem that I have right now and how do I recognize it in terms of symptoms. So that's where we're going to start first with some of the symptoms that we may be facing. And by my sharing it, it'll help you really identify them. And I will give complete credit in terms of the content has been inspired from 2 books for the session today. The first book is a book that we have been using on this topic on a continual basis, which is the book Boundaries by Dr. Henry Cloud and Dr. John Townsend. It's an amazing book, and a bulk of the content in terms of just concepts that I'm sharing are inspired from there. And of course, I've added my own perspective and my experiences and our theta healing activations, electromagnetic activations to it. The second book is the book called Working With You Is Killing Me. And this book, again, it's an amazing book that's been put together by Catherine Crowley and Kathy Elster. And this book beautifully identifies the symptoms of issues that we may have at the workplace and how really to go about addressing them. So let's start with the first section. As I said, we'll categorize the symptoms into two segments or 2 sections. The first set of symptoms are actually relating to us. and primarily to do with us. So let's take a look at what may they look like. The very first one is all my time is spent at work, or most of my time is spent at work, right? That's a very first thing, which means we are taking on more work than the number of hours we have in the day that we are getting paid for. Typically, this is called working overtime, and this basically, or working long hours. And this basically fundamentally signifies to us the inability to really say no to the management or the person who we are working with, who we may term as our boss, or even saying no to ourselves, or having the self-discipline. If you're self-employed, if you're in business for yourself, having that self-discipline to really get up from the workplace or a work desk, wherever you're working, saying, this is it, I'm done for the day, right? That requires us to really be self-disciplined if you're running your own business and working for yourself. And if you're working for someone else, it also shows that your inability to say no, or say or express the fact that the work being given to you is more than the number of hours in the day, or there are unrealistic expectations. So that's the very first thing. All my time is spent at work, or most of my time is spent at work. Now, again, I will read, these are my statements, and I would say these are inspired statements, what we may call as probably subconscious beliefs we may have, that we will then clear towards the later part of this particular session, where each one of these, as I mentioned, I do theta healing work, and will be clearing those and replacing them with something more positive, so that you don't have to, live with these limiting beliefs that are limiting your ability to really act in a healthy way to establish your boundaries. So the second symptom that we typically see, that is again primarily related to us, is I never know what's important versus urgent. What does this signify? It means that I am unclear and I'm ambiguous about my priorities. Now, in this case, again, this means that we probably don't know clearly what the priorities are. And if you're working in a job environment where somebody else is driving the priorities, this would mean that we have to communicate and really understand what is important, what is urgent, and try not to put off things to a point which are important that they end up becoming urgent, right? But remember, every time you're dealing with urgent items, that means you're constantly firefighting. You're in that reactionary mode. And for you to better manage your work, you really have to be focused on important things before they become urgent. And this is where it is crucially important for us, if more so if we are self-employed, or our business owners, that we are paying attention to those items that are important in a timely fashion, so that they don't end up becoming urgent. And if we are working with a manager or in a work environment, communicating and getting clear on priorities, right? That is so important for us to be able to do our jobs effectively. So this is the second aspect of I never know the difference between what is important versus urgent. The third symptom is simply, having this deeper resentment that I hate authority figures, or I hate authorities. Simple, deep down rejection or resentment towards any form of authority. And another manifestation of this, which is again coming from a deeper childhood experience, might be that I must compete with my coworkers. Now, both of these, although they look very different, I hate authority figures, or I hate authorities, or I must compete with my coworkers. They may look like completely different elements of the experience that you're having. But when you look at it, this is actually inspired from the book The Boundaries by Dr. Henry Cloud and Dr. John Townsend, where they actually talk about something called transference feelings. And the way I have understood and interpreted it from my healing work is that anytime you have a very strong reaction to a situation that is directly not related to what you're experiencing at workplace, whether it be with someone in the authority position, or with your coworkers that is indicating of a inner child issue that is unresolved. Let me take an example. What I mean by that is anytime, see, deep down, if you have this belief or this experience of being bossed or ruled over or dominated by, let's say, a parent as a child, saying, I'm your mother, you should listen to me, or I'm your father, do what I say. Now, when you have had that kind of a childhood experience where you've been dominated because of positional power by one of the parents or somebody in your in a positional power, like maybe a teacher or someone else in your childhood, there is that childhood, inner childhood time frame related belief or that resentment that gets formed with anybody in a position of authority. And how do you know that this is to do with childhood and not to do with something happening right now is when you can observe this event and ask yourself, is this directly related to me being bossed by somebody right now, or is it just my reacting to something that is dormant coming from some time else? Right? That question is going to surface up more awareness to really see if this is currently just an issue with the current scenario. And the second way to identify that is patterns. Have you always had issues with someone in a position of authority in all your jobs, in your past experiences? Because that may go way back in time to your childhood when that may have originated. The reason I've tied this up with the aspect of I must compete with my coworkers is also going back to childhood sibling rivalry. If that is something you have grown up with, let's say you have a sibling and you've grown up with being compared with your sibling by your parents or somebody else, those things sit in our subconscious mind as a child, and they morph into these beliefs that we are holding, or resentment or hatred that we are holding, that ends up manifesting in an adult work environment that makes no sense in the current context, but it is something you're dealing with from within you. Right. So that's why it becomes very important for us to get clear on whether the situation that you're going through right now is causing it, or it is, originating from someplace else some other time before now. The fourth, statement of belief that may surface up for us as a symptom is my workplace is my family, right? Many of us end up with this kind of, or maybe my work is my identity. Actually, that's the next one that's coming up. So my workplace is my family is expecting that your workplace is going to provide you with all the nurturing and support that you did not get on a personal level from maybe your family or your home, or from someone else. So now that becomes a very debilitating thing. That becomes a very debilitating thing because what does your job expect of you? The job is expecting you to show up as an adult, right? Whereas you are walking in thinking your workplace is going to be a family that will support you, nurture you, etc., that you didn't get from your personal front. So they don't go together. That causes significant dissonance. And as beautifully, mentioned by this Boundaries book by Henry Cloud and John Townsend, the job expects adult functioning, and the person who's walking in as an employee is expecting their childhood needs to be met. And that is going to be a huge factor of dissonance to be mindful of. The next item in the list, again, as a symptom, is my work and my work issues go with me wherever I go, which means I am carrying my work with me, and it becomes my job is my identity. And many of us walk around thinking our job is really our identity. When somebody asks you anything about you, the very first thing you talk about is your title, your designation and where you work. It is our identity is so wrapped up with what we do and where we work and what our title is. Now, here again, the other aspect, the other way this manifests is because our identity is wrapped around the work that we do on the title, we carry our work wherever we go, which means there's direct lack of boundaries between work and home, or work and personal life. And that causes a huge challenge, because if you don't establish healthy boundaries between your workplace and your home, then you're really bleeding both ends in. And think about it, in today's world, especially where we're all working from home, many of us who are in the kind of jobs like IT or anything that allows for us to work from home, the boundaries are already blurred. Thanks to the pandemic, we all are working remotely. And with that kind of a setup, it becomes even more important to establish and disconnect physically. And first of all, establish a physical workplace in your home that is deemed as your workplace, so that you know to physically get up, disconnect physically by getting up from that place and walking away to another area where okay, now my work time is over. You're physically indicating to disconnect and walk away from the work area, especially when you're working from home. And the second thing is to disconnect mentally. Many of us, even though we had an office to go work and come back, our mind is constantly still working, still processing what happened at the workplace, that we have not mentally disconnected. Right, and that clearly means you're carrying all the baggage from your work environment into your home, which is definitely not going to be healthy in the long run. So the need of the hour for all of us is so much required for us to establish that healthy boundary between our work and our home life or personal life, so that we don't carry all that across the two ends. And the second aspect that is super important is not to wrap our identity around the job that we do. And we'll be doing an activation for that later on in the session. And let's talk a little bit about those of us that are in business for ourselves. I mean, for my own self, I can give an example. Because I'm self-employed and run my own business, this role as being a coach, as a healer or a spiritual mentor has been, I would say, one of the biggest reasons why I had to learn to draw boundaries for my own self became super important. Because especially when people have access to you as a coach or a healer or a mentor, the expectation that exists that they can get instant answers or instant response, or that they will get instant and they can get questions answered, or maybe even healing done. Right now, the expectation exists because it's a profession where you are opening your heart and making yourself available to everybody. And at the same time, remember, you can only serve to the extent you are able to replenish for your own self. So this process of establishing, learning how to set limits on when I look at my messages, when I look at my calls, when I respond to them, becomes super important when I'm running my own business. And I do want to be available to people, but not at the expense of my own health, my own time, and things that I ought to get done. So this is a huge space of, growth. That's exactly how I call it. It's been such a growing experience to learn how to do this for myself. And no wonder I'm here, talking about it and teaching about this topic, simply because, as I say, everything that you do helps you grow. So this is I think one of the best gifts that I have learned and grown with as part of just becoming my own business person or running my own business. And the last one in the list, where again, last one, the first category where symptoms are primarily related to us, is I'm doing someone else's dream job, or I'm living someone else's dream. Now, this again is where doing a job that's someone else's dream for you, or meaning that when you're doing a job right now, asking yourself, do I really want to do this job, or am I doing this because somebody else planted it in my mind, and it was their dream that I'm actually pursuing right now. Right? As an example, many times as we grow up, and I can say this for sure from where I come from, in terms of demographically, if you're not an engineer or a doctor, you pretty much are good for nothing. That's kind of the mentality, the collective mentality that I have grown up with in the place that I'm from, which is, majority of the parts of India. And so when I asked myself, did I really choose? Well, I had a choice. I chose between two, either become a doctor or become an engineer. The choice was very simple. I didn't want to go to college for 5+ years and then do another, house surgeoncy or whatever it was called. The options were very limited and very clear. I'm like, I don't want to study for that long. So my next option is engineering. So that's kind of how I ended up picking the path. But am I doing what an engineer does today? Not necessarily. At least not an architectural engineer. That was my bachelor's degree, and The reason I give this example is because it is very important for us to love what we do. At a minimum, learn to love what we do until we can do what we love. Okay, let me repeat that now, right? At a minimum, learn to love what we do currently until we are able to figure a way or get to a point where we um, do what we love. Yeah. So that is the most important aspect, is to ask ourselves some really deep questions like, why did I choose this line of profession that I'm in? What about this job really makes me light up? What excites me about what I'm doing? Given an option, would I still be doing this job? If money was not the reason, would I still be doing this job? And if not, whose dream am I really living? Whose job is this? Whose dream job is this that I'm living? And where is my heart really at? Asking these questions again is only to get you on a path where you can lay a plan to get where you want to be, where you end up doing what you love. But at the same time, resenting where you are and not really appreciating and being grateful for the fact that you are being provided at the moment for where you are and what you're being given is not where we want to be either. So the beauty of where you are right now is you're exactly where you're meant to be. All of us are. So being grateful and learning to look at what do I love in what I do right now. That is going to free you from the feeling of being uh, trapped or being caught up or being bound to something. It's going to teach you to appreciate what you have, the fact that it's paying your bills, and the fact that you have you're able to afford your living as it is right now. Whatever it is that makes you look at the bright side of what you're doing right now, so that you learn to love it. And as you lay the plan to do what to be able to do what you love eventually, this will keep you going, and the frequency with which you are addressing or you're dealing with your daily work is going to shift. Okay, so these are the I think there are like six symptoms we talked about, which are primarily to do with us.